I wonder if he'll run as a Democrat or an independent.
Never know. Might be a Republican.
Yeah, well.
Please. Kind of self-respecting black man will run as a Republican. Name one thing the Republican Party has done for black people. One!
Well, they were the party of Lincoln. They stood against the tyranny of oppression by leading the call for the Civil War and forced passage of the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves.
I named two things lately.
Hey, welcome to Dino Reacts. And today, we're gonna get into some lessons from Thomas Sowell, one of my favorite people in the world. And we're gonna take ourselves from ignorance to excellence. And today we're gonna talk about the facts in history that they are not teaching in public education today because it would destroy the media's narrative about a lot of things. Pay attention. Let's learn something. And as always, let's get after it.
Sometimes minorities are on the short end of disparities, as in the United States, Britain, and France, and sometimes it is a majority that lags behind, as in Malaysia, Indonesia, or the Ottoman Empire. Sometimes the disparities are blamed on discrimination, sometimes on genes, but in any event, the disparities are treated as oddities that need explaining, no matter how common such supposed oddities are in countries around the world, or in how many centuries they have been common. Because intellectuals' assumptions about these disparities are so deeply ingrained, so widely disseminated, and have such powerful ramifications on so many issues, it is worth taking a closer and longer look at the facts of the real world, now and in the past. Where minorities have outperformed politically dominant majorities, it is especially difficult to make the case that discrimination is the cause. The problems with genetics as an all-purpose explanation will be dealt with in the next chapter. A study of the Ottoman Empire, for example, found that of the 40 private bankers listed in Istanbul in 1912, not one bore a Muslim name, nor was even one of the 34 stockbrokers in Istanbul a Turk. Of the capital assets of 284 industrial firms employing 5 or more workers, 50% were owned by Greeks and another 20% by Armenians. In the 17th century Ottoman Empire, the palace medical staff consisted of 41 Jews and 21 Muslims. The racial or ethnic minorities who have owned or directed more than half of whole industries in particular nations have included the Chinese in Malaysia, the Lebanese in West Africa, Greeks in the Ottoman Empire, Britons in Argentina, Belgians in Russia, Jews in Poland, and Spaniards in Chile, among many others. As of 1921, members of the Tamil minority in Ceylon outnumbered members of the Sinhalese majority in that country's medical profession. In America, there were 8 times during the 20th century when a baseball player stole 100 or more bases in a season. All 8 times, that player was black. Groups have differed greatly in innumerable endeavors in countries around the world. In 1908, Germans were the sole producers of the following products in Brazil's state of Sao Paulo: metal furniture, trunks, stoves, paper, hats, neckties, leather, soap, glass, matches, beer, confections, and carriages. People of Japanese ancestry who settled in that same state produced more than 2/3 of the potatoes and more than 90% of the tomatoes. Exporters from the Lebanese minority in the African nation of Sierra Leone accounted for 85% of the exports of ginger in 1954 and 93% in 1955. In 1949, Lebanese truckers in Sierra Leone outnumbered African truckers and European truckers combined. In 1921, more than 3/5 of all the commerce in Poland was conducted by Jews, who were only 11% of the population. In 1948, members of the Indian minority owned roughly 9/10 of all the cotton gins in Uganda. In colonial Ceylon, the textile, retailing, wholesaling, and import businesses were all largely in the hands of people of Indian ancestry, rather than in the hands of the Sinhalese majority. As early as 1887, more than twice as many Italians as Argentines had bank accounts in the Banco de la Provincia de Buenos Aires. even though most 19th century Italian immigrants arrived in Argentina destitute and began working in the lowest, hardest, and most menial jobs.
I know. A lot of this can go over my head. I'm not gonna even lie. It sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo, but when I take the time to like service it and let it in and get to me, it's basically telling me that in most majorities, the people that hold the wealth are people from outside of the country. You know what I'm saying? Or outside of the majority of that area or region. Because he just kept going around saying that the majority of this country. Then he said, but the bankers and the profiteers and the philanthropists were all from someplace else. And for the most part, that's predominantly true. And I can look at that in the restaurant business. I'm here in California. The predominant people that work in the restaurant business of Latin people. But if you look at the people who are at the top of the food chain, my general manager, my manager, even my executive chef, they're not from Los Angeles at all. So in some aspects, there is a disparity there. But this is what we're here for, to broaden the mind. Let's continue.
In the United States, knowledge of the frugality of Italian immigrants and their reliability in repaying debts, even when they had low incomes, caused a bank to be set up to attract this clientele in San Francisco under the name Bank of Italy. It became so successful that it spread out to the larger society and eventually became the largest bank in the world under its new name, Bank of America. The frugality of Italians was not simply a perception or a stereotype, as A.P. Giannini well knew when he set up this bank. As far away as Australia, Italians earned a reputation for scrupulous honesty in the repayment of their debts, and were frequently able to secure more extensive loans than Australians. At one period of history or another, when it was not one specific racial or ethnic minority dominating an industry or occupation, it has often been foreigners in general, leaving the majority population of a country outnumbered, or even non-existent, in whole sectors of their own economy. Even after the middle of the 20th century, most of the industrial enterprises in Chile were controlled by either immigrants or the children of immigrants. At various times and places, foreign minorities have predominated in particular industries or occupations over the majority populations of Peru, Switzerland, Malaysia, Argentina, Russia, much of the Balkans, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia.
And you can see that right now in predominantly black neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that are predominantly black or predominantly neighborhoods of people of color, the industries that are giving the utilities and amenities and services in other communities, those people don't even live there. They have their homes and their money outside of that community, but they come into the community to take from it and put it elsewhere. So he's right. These types of things are existing now today and have always existed. But there's always the majority that don't take advantage of that by taking their resources to other neighborhoods and then taking from that environment and bringing it back to their own. And I think that's one of the biggest disparities when it comes to the black neighborhood. The black neighborhoods, I don't see any place where black people are reaping resources and bringing it back to build up their neighborhoods. I see them getting resources out of the neighborhood, not building up their own neighborhood, and completely spending their money frivolously to build other people's economies. You know what I'm saying? Like the fancy cars, luxury clothing, excessive jewelry, showboaty lifestyle. None of them own the diamonds or the furs or any of the clothing companies that produce these wealths, but that money easily flies out of the hood instead of building up your own hood or building up the businesses in your own hood. Well, at the end of the day, you can see Indian food places, Chinese food places, liquor stores run by Chinese. There's so many industries, Walgroves, the banks. There's so many industries other than the black church, which is the sole one, that don't put anything back into the community, but are owned by races that come in. They will take the resources from those communities and send it elsewhere. So he's absolutely right. I'm just looking at it at a small scale, though, from the way I can understand it. But he's right.
Indeed, it has been a worldwide phenomenon, found even in some economically advanced countries, as well as being common in less advanced countries. In the 19th century, Scottish Highlanders were not as prosperous as Scottish Lowlanders, whether in Scotland itself or as immigrants living in Australia or the United States. In the 20th century, Gaelic-speaking children in the Hebrides Islands off Scotland did not score as high on IQ tests as the English-speaking children there. Rates of alcoholism among Irish Americans have at one time been some multiple of the rates of alcoholism among Italian Americans or Jewish Americans. In the days of the Soviet Union, the consumption of cognac in Estonia was more than 7 times what it was in Uzbekistan. In Malaysia during the 1960s, students from the Chinese minority earned more than 400 degrees in engineering, while students from the Malay majority earned just 4 engineering degrees during that same decade. Such examples could be extended almost indefinitely, and so could the reasons for the disparities. But a more fundamental question must be faced. Was there ever any realistic chance that the various races would have had the same skills, experience, and general capabilities, even if they had the same genetic potential and faced no discrimination? Different races, after all, developed in different parts of the world, in very different geographic settings, which presented very different opportunities and restrictions on their economic and cultural evolution over a period of centuries. There is no way, for example, that the patterns of economic and social life which originated and evolved in Europe could have originated among the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, where the horses that were central to everything from farming to transportation to warfare in Europe simply did not exist anywhere in the Western Hemisphere when the European invaders arrived and began transplanting horses across the Atlantic to the New World. Take horses out of the history of Europe, and a very different kind of economy and society would have had to evolve in order to be viable. Not only horses were lacking in the Western Hemisphere, neither were there oxen, which were common in both Europe and Asia. There were, in short, no such heavy-duty beasts of burden in the Western Hemisphere as existed on the vast Eurasian landmass, where most of the human race has lived throughout recorded history. The way of life in these different regions of the world had no basis on which to be the same, which is to say, there was no way for the skills and experiences of the races in these regions to be the same. The wheel has often been regarded as fundamental to economic and social advances, but for most of the history of the human race, the value of wheeled vehicles depended to a great extent on the presence of draft animals to pull those vehicles. And there were no wheeled vehicles in any of the economies of the Western Hemisphere when the Europeans arrived. The Mayans had invented wheels, but they were used on children's toys, so the issue was not the intellectual capacity to invent the wheel, but the circumstances that make wheels more valuable or less valuable. Clearly, the way of life among the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere could not have been the same as that on the Eurasian landmass, when there were neither wheeled vehicles nor draft animals in the Western Hemisphere when the Europeans and their animals arrived. Regardless of which race lived in Europe or in the Western Hemisphere, they would have faced very different opportunities or restrictions as regards their economic and cultural development before they encountered each other, and could hardly have been the same at that time.
Well, I can definitely tell you a lot of that went right over my head. But I'm definitely digging in so I can figure out more things. There's a quote that a friend of mine told me a couple days ago that says, once your mind is introduced to new things, it can never go back to factory reset. So as long as I keep allowing myself to be introduced and flooding my knowledge with new people, new words, and new understanding, then I will expand and I will grasp. And as always, I will be able to take my ignorance to excellence. So what we were listening to was Thomas Sowell. So I went and bought his book. I don't know if you can see it. Discrimination and Disparities. I really like the way that he puts together his words and his understanding of the world around me. And I'm a deep lover of history. If you look at the videos on my channel, and I'm gonna dig into this, as in bringing more clips from him, just so I can have a deeper understanding and grasp. Sometimes you can't always listen to things that make you comfortable or that'll make you happy. Sometimes you got to be challenged, and I feel like this kind of stretches me a little bit. So if you want to go down this journey with Thomas Sowell with me to learn more, as I keep finding clips from this book, I'll be reading the book and bringing more clips to you. And then we can, and definitely put down in the comments anything that you might understand that I might not understand, because that's very helpful to me. I'm very thankful. And I want to say thank you too for this journey. It's beautiful to like find education in life. I have a chance that my father and my grandfather never had. And maybe I took a little time to get to it, but we here. We here. So as always, let's have some fun with this education. Woo! Once again, thank you guys for watching Dino Reacts. And if you like my content, like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, chef's kiss. Mwah!